Hey guys, welcome to the first video of this unit. This is for Algebra 1 and we're specifically going to be focusing on equations and inequalities and what that looks like when it comes to terms with solving them as well as graphing. So we're going to start off by looking at equations, just linear equations, and just giving a brief overview. This is anything where if I'm looking at a graph, it'll look something like this, where the line, it's a straight line. So that's what it means to be linear. And we're going to be going over like how to solve these, how to graph them, and just how to analyze a graph to know whether it's negative or positive, and what that means when we're solving for x and y. So for thinking about solving, we can just come up with any examples that we want to use. So if I have something like y minus 7 equals 2x plus 4. Obviously, we're going to be going more in depth later in the unit about how we're actually going to be solving for this. But since this is an overview, we're just going to be going over the basics. So in the end, once I solve, this is what my final equation will be. And this is what's going to help me later to like see how this looks on a graph, know what this means, what the coefficient 2 means, and then what this last constant number means. So when we're looking at linear equations and solving, we always want to solve it into this form that we call y equals mx plus b. So later in the unit, we'll be talking about what those mean. But the key focus we want to hold on to for linear equations is that your x is always just x alone. It's not going to be x squared, x cubed, or anything. It is just one singular x. So we're going to be covering the steps on how to solve for this and what to do if maybe you don't have two different variables. Maybe you just have x in it. So it would be like x plus 7 equals 2x minus 4. And we'll be covering like how to isolate x, how to get the certain number that x will equal to make this equation true. The next thing we're going to be covering for linear equations is just how to graph them. So I did show a little example earlier. Obviously, when you graph it, it will look straighter and more perfect than these drawings. But the key focus of this is that your linear equations are going to be a straight line. There's no curve to them. That means that it's decreasing or increasing at a constant rate each time. And we'll cover more about what that may mean and how slope plays a factor into this. So when I showed you that equation earlier of mx plus b, our slope is referring to the letter m, and that'll change the way you graph it because it'll show different rates of increase or decrease, and it'll change the steepness of the graph. So this will all be covered later in the unit, just a quick overview. Okay. Another part of this unit is going to be inequalities. So this is very similar to how you'd go about solving linear equations, other equations, or graphing these. But the only difference is that you're going to be looking at, instead of an equal sign like we're used to in all of our equations, so say I had y plus 7 equals 2x plus 4. We're going to be looking at something like y plus 7 is greater than 2x plus 4. So we'll learn about what that means when you're solving or just isolating a certain variable. And we'll also look at examples where, again, it's the same variable. So instead of y plus 7, it could be x plus 7. And we'll learn how to isolate the x in order to know specifically what x may be greater than. So that relates to solving, just isolating the certain variables and understanding what the different inequalities mean. So we know there's greater than, less than, and then also possibly introducing greater than and equal to and less than or equal to. And then later this will go into graphing. So when we're looking at graphs of inequalities, we'll just do a quick, brief overview of it. It could be very similar to how we go about graphing any linear equations or equations that you've graphed in the past. The difference is that since we do have that inequality present, we have to pay attention to maybe it's x is greater, and that means that I'll just do a quick example because it may be hard to see. But once we dive deeper into it in the unit, it'll make more sense as to what these inequalities mean we're talking about graphing. So a quick example would just be like y is greater than x plus 2. So once we learn how this is, we can just look at it as y equals x plus 2 first. And once we cover how to graph these linear equations, the first thing we can notice is that y equals x plus 2 is actually a linear equation. So that wouldn't really look like this graph right there. It would look more, actually, that's a bad example. It'll look more like this. So once we learn how to graph these linear equations, it'll help us with inequalities because when we go back to our original inequality we're looking at, we know that y is greater. And if this is your y-axis right here, and you're looking at numbers greater than what this equation graphed to be, you know that it's anything that's going to be up here. So we'll cover that more later. It'll make more sense once we learn how to do these certain things. But I just wanted to give a quick overview for what this unit is going to be talking about in case you had any broader questions. And then we will also be linking more videos below on going more in depth for each of these topics we talked about.